Welcome to Real Estate Success DFW, the podcast where top producing agents from Dallas-Fort Worth come together to share their stories and strategies behind their success. I'm Shaune Corbett, your host, and with over 300 million sold in the local real estate market and the honor of being best of D multiple times, I know what it takes to make it in this market. Each episode, we're going to dive into the world of real estate, learning from the very best in the industry. If you're ready to level up your game, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Shaune Corbett here with Real Estate Success DFW, and I've got a special guest, Gabriel Corra, who is with Exlence Realty, and he has got a history. He's definitely been selling real estate for a long time. I think he was telling me he invented real estate agency. Okay, well, he didn't actually say that, but he's been doing it long enough not to embarrass him from his age or anything. But I love talking to someone that's been there, that's seen different markets. You know, there's a whole lot of changes. I know back in the 90s, we used to have the books. He and I were kind of joking a little bit about that. And even before that, they were introducing, other ways for people to be able to communicate the message of what's available. And we post all of it in the newspapers and all those kind of things. So totally different market now. Obviously, he's gone through creating buyer agency. Now buyer agency is back on, the threatening space that it was, a month or two ago. So we'll have fun things to talk about. So, hey, how are you, Gabriel?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Anytime. I think there's going to be some fun stuff to talk about. So let's do a little bit of background. I always kind of start and preface, kind of who you are and where you've been. I know you'd mentioned in some notes with me, you started in 92 and then you quickly advanced. You picked it up where 95% of the agents don't pick it up fast and get going. So obviously you were able to have success early on. You won Rookie of the Year. Fantastic. What made that work for you? How did you achieve that in such an early status?
So I started off with a small brokerage firm, and a lot of what I've learned over the years have been just trial and error. I'm a firm believer of not necessarily being an expert at it, but fail enough that you fail forward. So I first started off, had no idea what I was getting into, had no idea what the market was going to be like. My first language is Spanish, so I actually started with a Hispanic brokerage, and I just started my first lead. I decided I was going to do a buyer's consult way before we even had buyer brokerage or anything like that. And I told my client that we could meet their next day off, and well, typical Hispanic fashion, we don't have a day off. Okay, which day do you have that you work less jobs? Because he was working 3 jobs, and that was a Saturday. So I made arrangements that following week to meet with him. Of course, hung up the phone and panicked because I was like, okay, now what do I do? And back then we didn't have electronic contracts and forms that were tear off with the carbonless paper and multiple copies. You had to buy the little packet of contracts. So we made arrangements for me to go and kind of educate them on the buying process, take them through the contract, especially for my Hispanic clients that there still isn't a Spanish contract. They had to sign and agree to an English contract. So just getting them to understand what all the ins and outs were. I reached back out on a Friday before the meeting, and he had said, hey, I hope you don't mind. I told a few friends and other family members. I said, no problem. Just let me know. That way I know what materials to bring. He had 14 family members there.
Oh, my goodness.
14 groups of families. I got there. All the kids are playing in the middle of the grass where the apartment complex was, and all the furniture is pulled out. I'm like, are they cleaning the apartment? What are they doing? And they had set up chairs.
You did like a new home seminar for a bunch of people.
That's exactly what it turned out to be. It ended up being a first-time homebuyer seminar. They had set up all the chairs without me even asking. They set up all the chairs in like a church fashion, and I came in and I spoke for a couple hours and walked them through the contract, explained everything that they needed to do, and how things would go. I ended up getting 14 clients out of that. 13 of the 14, I sold houses within 30 days. The 14th couple took 60 days to get them to get all their ducks in a row and what we had to do to get them qualified. And of course, from there, it went into just, it exponentially grew from there. And I still to this day, I do a buyer's consult. I've always taught my agents to do that even before it was quote unquote forced with the whole NAR lawsuit. I've always done a buyer's consult. I've always sat down, gone through the entire contract, gone through the buyer's rep agreement, explained the ins and outs of it, and what all the details were. So there was my goal is always to avoid them ever thinking or God forbid saying out loud, Gabriel, if I knew this, I wouldn't have done that. Can I cover everything? No, but after 30 plus years, I come pretty close. So I get them to feel a lot more comfortable, and it makes it easier when I remind them of us going over X as opposed to trying to explain X later on through the process. So if I explain to them, hey, we're going to do inspections and the inspector is going to pretty much flag everything that's not to code. The house is 30 years old. It's definitely not going to pass today's mustard on what the current regulations are. We're not going to be expecting to get a new house. We're going to go after the things that are costly, like an AC not working or it needs a new roof, and things that are dangerous. Even if it's a $5 gas leak, that's not an acceptable gas leak. So those are the things that we're going to typically go after on an inspection. So by having that conversation beforehand, I avoid the problem of after the fact, we're going, where God forbid we have a bad inspection report and the buyer freaks out. We've already talked through this. We may revisit it, but it's a lot easier to have a conversation about it again, as opposed to when it happens, because then it sounds like you're making excuses and they feel a lot more comfortable with the transaction and they feel like you're looking out for their best interest, which you are.
Yeah, let's unpack some of this because you've got some good points in there. I want to make sure that people understand. One of the core things that you talked about is this buyer consult, right? So back in the 90s, there was a period of time, even prior to that, that we didn't have buyer agent representation, right? It was basically the listing would take the listing and they would sell it, and then they would have, what do they call it, co-op or a co-agent that would
Sub-agencies sometimes, yeah.
or sometimes sub-agencies where there wouldn't be anyone specifically representing the buyer and the buyer needs. So out of that, they saw the real value add of actually having someone represent, because there are a whole lot of moving parts on the buy side that the builder or the seller is not going to be specifically interested in looking after, right? So that was a really good value add that you did even prior to us even having buyer agency, which I think was in the late 90s, I think is when they started bringing out buyer agency. Or was it 2000? So it was sometime around
It was, late 90s, early 2000, around 2000, they, at least here in Texas, they decided that even though everybody was acting like, I started my career acting like I was representing the buyer.
Yeah.
But in reality, legally, I represented the seller and I was a sub-agent to the seller. So technically speaking, I shouldn't have been able to run numbers for them and give them advice and stuff like that. So at least here in Texas, they realized, okay, wait a minute, we need to differentiate, the difference between representing a buyer and representing the seller and fully disclosing it. So that's when a lot of that came about. And that just became my practice. I taught all my agents to do the same thing. I think that's the biggest challenge that we're having now with a lot of agents where they haven't been forced to do that, or they just didn't get around to doing that. I've spoken to a lot of agents around the country from my referral basis that they've said, no, we only use that if we wanted to make sure we kept our commission. Well, that's not really the main purpose of that form. It's the representation and putting into writing that I'm actually going to look out for your best interest and, not the seller's best interest. And that wasn't ever disclosed prior to that coming out. And then now it's just being forced because, people assume that they didn't have any say so one way or another.
Sure. And we've gone through, say evolution of the buyer agent where we had this period of time, 20, 24 years. And then all of a sudden now it's now being scrutinized again. Ironically, the timing of it will probably make that it won't land very hard in practice, except for those that are not actually doing buyer rep consults. I understand that problem, but from what I can tell, most sellers and listing agents are all pretty much still offering a fair compensation for bringing the buyer. even after the NAR agreement, only because they need to sell. And the market was built with the price of their property to include that value of paying to get a buyer agent to represent a buyer. So it's all kind of stayed in there. Now, if we had a different market, we would probably see some real challenge to that. And we could have a different market next year. We could really change over and become advantage seller heavy, could. And if it's advantage seller heavy, then they may say, hey, we got all the buttons, right? So we'll decide if we're going to pay or not. But as of right now, it hasn't really changed much outside of being and getting agreements immediately. I think that was one of the big changes that people realized that was very important. I was going to say, you mentioned you were doing trial and error, you tried a lot of things. This particular space, you were successful doing adopting early buyer rep agreements or buyer representation. I always think of, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, right? Yeah, I kind of like it the way to think that way, since everything is an experience that we're trying to grow here. And I like your expectations on inspections. That's just an example, right? There's a lot of different components.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of steps that go through the whole buying and selling process. And that was just one of them as an example. Again, it's a lot easier. The example I give to my clients or to my agents is, if you're leaving work and you're going to go have a beer with a friend from work, and you don't call your wife or your significant other and say, hey, I'm going to go have a drink with a buddy of mine and then I'll be home, and then all of a sudden they're expecting you to be home 2 hours ago. And now you come in and you're maybe a little tipsy or whatever. Sounds like you're making excuses as opposed to, hey, honey, I'm coming home a little bit later. I'm going to grab a drink, so and so's birthday at work or whatever. Now that expectation's been set. Same results, same issue. It just, you set the expectation ahead of time. It's a lot easier to navigate it.
I like expectations. I think for a lot of our buyers that have never experienced this before, I try to always stay ahead of, what the next experience is going to be, right? And one of the things I think about is, as a buyer agent, where you can really add value is always provide a next step, no matter the circumstance. For example, we make an offer. I will tell the buyer, okay, we're waiting for them to respond. Assuming that they want to counter, we're going to expect some type of counter. This is, reasonably what we're going to expect to see. Or we get under contract, okay, now we're going to talk about option and earnest, some of the generic things. But then the main thing is we're going to run into problems when we inspect this house based on the age. I would expect probably $3,000 to $5,000 of maintenance things that are going to be required. We're really going to focus, like you said, on the serious things that are going to be consequential to you if we don't address safety and expensive items, right? Roof foundation and HVAC. I always try to, but having that conversation up front and setting the space and the expectation really helps set the mood. Because, right, I mean, who wants to be, I like how you said it. I've never heard it said that way. Now you're explaining and you sound like you're just excusing everything. Oh, well, yeah, that's an old house. Now the plumbing's not good. Or it's an old house. Yeah, the electrical's not good. We've already had the conversation before it happened, right? I don't have to sit here and explain away everything. What are you comfortable moving forward with and what are you not? And it changes.
It's a shorter conversation when I can say, hey, do you remember we talked about this could potentially happen?
Mhm.
And we kind of have a joke of a saying in Texas, when it comes to termites and foundation, there's two types of houses. One that has had termites or foundation problem, or one that's going to have it.
Yeah.
So this way, when even those things even come up that are pretty big issues for most houses, a lot of times if you've already had that conversation, it's an easier conversation for you with the buyer because you're reminding them of it. Doesn't make it any better, doesn't lessen the blow any, but oh yeah, you're right, we did talk about that. Okay, what's the next step? So it makes it much easier and palatable for the buyer. And I've had buyers literally get to closing and they're nervous as hell at closing, and they're like, why are you so nervous? It's like, well, I've heard so many friends tell me it's going to be a horrible experience and something bad's going to happen. And I'm just expecting it to happen now at closing. And I'm like, we've had some big mishaps through this whole process. You ended up getting the foundation fixed or a new roof or whatever. And he's like, oh, yeah, you prepped me for that. That wasn't a big deal. Okay. But again, the expectations were set. And then, of course, you've got outside sources that will set different expectations. And then they get through the whole process. It's like, oh my God, this is so easy. It just kind of fell in place, and everything you told me was going to happen happened, and it was a smooth transaction. When you're looking back at it and going, this was not that smooth of a transaction. Also, I think the way we react, there's too many realtors that take, not that you don't care about your clients, but they take the transaction too emotionally personal. They can come back and say, oh, it needs a new roof. And if I call you back, I'm going, hey, you remember we talked about the potential of a new roof? They're putting a new roof on it. And in fact, we've got it quick enough that we can actually pick the color of the shingles. Okay, great. Or I could call you up and go, oh my God, the roof is caving in. This house is a piece of junk.
Yeah,
You're going to react based on me as the professional. And I think
sure,
that's the error a lot of realtors make. They get and they think they're benefiting their client. And then those are the ones that are, I've shown them 30 houses and we put in 25 offers and we haven't gotten any houses. Well, maybe it's the way you're approaching it. Maybe it's the
sure.
way you're looking at things.
A lot of them act like they are the buyer or the seller, and that's
Correct.
not their role. That's not their job. We
No.
look after them, we advise. We're not the buyer, we're not the seller. We don't have to live there. It's not up to us. So,
Yeah.
and they do. I've had one agent where I had a brokerage for about 10 years, and she used to negotiate herself out of like all of her contracts. And
Yeah.
it's because she would put herself, well, I wouldn't pay that much, or I wouldn't buy a house on the roof like that. I'm like, you're not the buyer. Just tell them their risks and let them make the decision, right? We all have different risks. We all have different emotional attachments to these things. So that's
Yeah.
a it's a very
As
good
long
point.
as I think if the client is making a well-educated decision and they feel comfortable with their decision and you haven't held any material facts away from them and you've given them all the details, they have to make the decision on their own, you know?
For sure.
And I think that's where a lot of realtors sometimes get too emotionally charged. And then they're, like you were saying, they kind of talk themselves out of the business.
So you've been here in the Dallas Fort Worth area the whole time. Is that true? At
Correct.
least for real
Yes.
estate. Okay. And how
Yes.
have you seen it change, and what do you think the near future is going to look like?
There's definitely a lot of uncertainty with the whole NAR lawsuit, a lot of misconceptions. I've learned some very interesting things just from talking to people from other market areas in other parts of the United States, as well as the conception of what some of the general public believes this NAR lawsuit is. I'll give you an example. I put a house on the market with an investor. She's bought a number of properties and sold a number of properties with me. We put it on the market. And of course, we had to do a price reduction because we weren't moving the house. And she kind of jokingly but seriously said, I kind of miss 2022 and 2023. I said, so do we. Everybody else does as well, where things were flying off the shelf and at much higher values than it was really worth. And she says, how do we get that? I'm like, there's no marketing dollars that I can spend to get you that kind of showing. I said, the only thing we can do is we can ridiculously lower the price of the house
Of course, above.
just to get
Yeah, to get multiple
activity.
offers. Yeah.
Exactly. So she missed the multiple offer days of 30, 40, 50 offers. My staff didn't, but she definitely did. So I said, okay, I said, we can lower the price. Let's lower it. And so I looked, and in this particular city, the lowest price house that was a 3 bedroom, 2 bath detached home was about 350. You couldn't get anything less than that. And it wasn't as great of a property. Ours was substantially better, and we dropped it to 330. Needless to say, I got a lot of phone calls and a lot of offers. In a week, I got 33 offers.
No kidding.
So I stirred the market up. I turned it upside down in the MLS, and a lot of people were coming in. What I found very interesting out of all that was out of the 33 offers, I got 6 of them that were straight from the buyers. The buyers themselves downloaded the forms from our local board
Really?
and wrote the contracts themselves horribly, did not do a good job, obviously, and submitted offers. One of them, I had his contact information because we did an open house, and in 2 hours, we had over 100 people come through the open house, which was unheard of. And this was just a few months ago. So it was like 2022, 2023 again. I spoke to one of the buyers and I said, I've got a question for you. And he says, he called me and he was like, why didn't you guys accept our offer? And I said, well, we had a lot higher offers than yours, And I said, but since you're asking questions, can I ask you a question? Why did you submit your own offer? He said, well, with the new NAR lawsuit, we don't have representation. So I had to represent myself and
Yeah,
submit an
yeah.
offer. And I'm
Misunderstanding.
like, okay. I said, you do know that we were paying buyer representation commissions to a buyer broker. You could have used an agent or used an agent from our office or anything. You could have used any random realtor to help you write that offer. And he's like, no, that's not the way I understood it. And I said, well, I understand that, and it gave me an opportunity to kind of educate him a little bit on it. But I was surprised at the amount of people that has that conception that they don't have representation. So this whole NAR lawsuit thing is not necessarily portraying the information the way it should, I believe, to the general public.
Sure.
And I think even us realtors, there's a lot of realtors that are misunderstanding and don't quite understand the whole purpose of it. And then, so it was shocking for me to see that there are buyers out there that think that they have no representation and they can't get representation without necessarily buying it themselves or anything like that, when there's still plenty of sellers that are paying a commission. So I was kind of bummed for them to think that that's the way they're seeing it. And, it's a discredit to the buyers, unfortunately, and they're going to end up suffering from it. And most of the first time home buyers don't have the funds to come up with their down payment and also pay buyer compensation. So they're out
But
of the market.
were you able to work with them? Are you now their buyer agent?
So we're working on it. Part of their challenge is their credit score and income doesn't allow them to get into a higher price range.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the neighborhood or the town that I did the price reduction to 330, the average sales price is 550 in
Yeah,
there.
you
And
said you're already low for your price anyway.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So realistically, 450, 500 is where people need to qualify. And they were just trying because all they qualified for was 330, 340. So yeah, we are working with them. We've done a buyer's consult and they felt, it's like, oh, wow, I wish I knew all this before I even tried to submit an offer. And, which we usually get. And it's surprising, but it works.
Let's cover that, right? So with prices, obviously, I mean, you would think rising in general, they're flat for about the last year and a half or so, but they've already had that massive spike. And
Correct.
I usually use this analogy. Prior to COVID, you could live in an apartment and pay $2,000 a month and then be able to find a house and stay in your same lifestyle at 2,000 a month. Okay. This is prior to COVID.
Correct.
Today, you're paying $2,000 a month to get that same lifestyle. You're probably now 350, 400 to get the same lifestyle. And that's going to be 3,000, 3,500 a month, which makes it impossible to be able to afford. So that's been a massive change in a very short amount of time, less than 5 years, that you've gone from being able to afford to make that transition to now how do you help first-time home buyers find affordable options in today's market?
So the way we're helping our first time home buyers with that is they cannot be in our northern metroplex. They just can't stay in our Collin County, our general area. So they're having to go a little bit further north. And the other thing that we're doing is there's a lot of builders that own their own mortgage companies. So they're able to offer some substantial incentives, both in buying as well as in financing. So last month, I had 4 that closed that they were at a fixed rate of 3.99. So that made it a lot more appealing. What most buyers don't realize is you qualify not for the sales price, but the monthly payment of that sales price. So when you've got a monthly payment that is too high because you're at 7% interest, then your buying power is much less, to where I can take them out 30, 45 minutes further north to some of the newer builder communities. They don't get a whole lot of selection. They've got a handful of floor plans and preset color packages. They're not picking the color of their flooring or anything like that, or the color of their walls, sort of it being a package. But they can get a good house and they get it lower than what they would get in Plano or in Frisco or, Allen or something like that. And they're able to get a little bit more real estate and a lower monthly payment because the lender is owned, lender, builder, they're all the same company. So they get to set their own rates. And the builders have gotten smart and they're making sure that they're paying buyers representation commissions, and then they're offering great incentives. I think most of them were $10,000 or $15,000 towards closing cost, or just a bunch of different incentives, lower the price, stuff like that. So now they're getting in for little amount of money down, FHA 3.5% down, and then they're getting a really good interest rate. And it's not a 2-1 buy down. It's not a temporary fix. It is a permanent fix. It's a 3.9 for the term of the loan, which is definitely helpful. And we're able to get a lot of our buyers able to buy something. Where we run into a challenge is when they have to be closer in town or something like that. It's almost impossible to get them into anything.
No, I feel, especially in that price point, 350, you get below 300, the house is generally needs massive renovation. It's not
Oh,
something
absolutely.
buyers can do. Yeah. I mean, Collin County is going to be a more expensive area for sure. You mentioned earlier, you're talking about working with investors. And I'm just curious, like when in your mix, it sounds like you have a lot of new first time home buyers, maybe sub 400,000 buyers, but you also have investors. Is that a big part? You mentioned that you had an investor that's done a number of opportunities with you. So what would you advise them for long-term investment and things like that for investors out there?
So most of our investors that we're working with, and I'm probably, I'd say 40% buyers, both first-time home buyers and also secondary buyers that are moving up or buying something bigger. Probably 45% is investors. Either we convert a lot of buyers once they buy our home into investors as well, especially in the last couple of years where we had a lot of people that moved here from California, sold their 1,200 square foot shack for 1.8 million, and
Yeah.
they bought a mini mansion here for 800,000. So a lot of them took some of that extra money and have bought some investment properties, rentals and stuff like that. Well, I've gotten a lot of them that have gotten into with us. We probably do 45 to 50 flips a year for ourselves as well as for our investors. So, a lot of them have done that and they get some pretty good returns. They're able to get 20, 25% rate of return in 60, 90 days, which isn't bad. So it just depends. I've come up with an investment spreadsheet over the years where we go over everything, and I'm very pessimistic when it comes to my numbers. So when we look at it, I can say, hey, if we do this and this is how much it's going to cost us. And, we try to guesstimate as much as we could what the cost of renovations are. And we have a percentage of margin error or surprises, oops, that pop up. You fix the foundation and you break plumbing and that kind of stuff, that, they still end up with a good rate of return on their investment. And some of them will flip and then they keep them, and they flip and hold, and then they'll make them a rental for a year or two, and then either keep it as a rental or we'll turn around and sell it and move on to the next property.
You said that you do about 40 to 45. Is that just you? Is that Exlence Realty or you personally or you
So
and your clients?
I actually have two real estate brokerages, the renovation company, and then I have a flipping company. So our flipping entity usually does 40, 45 flips a year. Some of them completely funded by myself, or we also have a number of investors that we co-invest in a property and make it happen. Most of our investors, in fact, all of them, don't care about going to pick the color of the grout or the tile
Sure.
or the flooring. They just want to put in the money and they want to see what the return is, and they want good communication. So a lot of times we've got investors that will put in a portion of the investment and they get a portion of the return.
Okay. So it's turnkey, right? There's not,
Yes.
yeah, they shouldn't be telling you colors and stuff. That should be on you and
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
contractors.
we make exactly. Yeah, we
What,
make it as simple as possible for them because most of them, in fact, all of them have full-time jobs and some of them are working 50, 60 hours. We got doctors, we got IT engineers, and we've got a lot of people that are high functioning, busy professionals in their career, and that's the last thing they want to do. But they also have, I hate to say money burning their pocket, but they've got excess money that they're willing to use this as their part of their portfolio, and we keep on helping grow their portfolio. And of course, we make them happy every time, so they keep on coming back for more.
I love it. So are you direct to seller or do you have like a network of people you work with to find homes?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. We work a lot of distress sales, divorces, pre-foreclosures, short sales. We got really good at short sales in 2008, really good at short sales, and they're starting to come back. And then I've got wholesalers. I've got probably 100 wholesalers that reach out to me on a regular basis and say, "Hey, I've got XYZ property." And then we run our analytics and our numbers on them to see if we agree with what they're saying, because most of the time their numbers are very inflated and not realistic. So we look at it and, we buy a lot of properties off market and we get leads as well off the website where people just go in and they want a cash value on their listing. And we use that as well for when we go to do a listing agreement. When we
Sure.
go to do a listing presentation, we give them a number of options. And usually it's, hey, we can put your house on the market the way it is. This is what we think we can sell it for. Or we can do A, B, and C, and you can kind of flip your own house. And I try to usually give them suggestions that if they spend $1, they'll make $2 or $3 for every dollar they spend. And you can renovate your own home and we can put on the market and you'll make this much more. Or you can just take a cash offer, walk away, you schedule your time, you pick exactly when you want to move and everything, and you've got a guaranteed sale and we can go find you something else. So this way they've got options and they make a decision. Again, avoiding them ever thinking or God forbid saying out loud, Gabe, if I knew this, I wouldn't have done that. And that way it gives them options. I hate when sellers then look at somebody that buys their house, even if it's just a general buyer, and then 6 months later it's back on the market for 100 grand more and they put 20,000 into it. And they're like, darn, if I would have known that, I would have spent the $20,000. I would have pulled out of my 401k, I would have borrowed it. I had the money, I could have done it. So we try to cover all those bases when we go to do a listing agreement or a listing presentation and present them with options. I like to try to give my clients options if possible. I'm never making a decision for them. I'm giving them the options to make a well-educated decision on their own.
What percentage of ARV are you looking to buy at?
We try to stick around 20 to 30%. It just depends. It depends on if I'm doing it myself or if I have investors. Some of my investors are content with, they can make 15, 20,000 on a flip in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. They're happy. And, sometimes I got to put 50,000 into it, but they're content. And I've got some that are do one or two a year. I got some that'll do three or four a year or five a year. They want to keep on turning it. And each time they turn it, they've got a little bit more revenue to put in. And, it depends. I'm not so strict on what the AVRs are going to be because I want the client to decide what makes the most sense for them. I have a threshold for myself and it just depends. Sometimes I'll look at something and go, all right, we can throw flooring and paint in this thing and I'm only going to make 15,000 on it, but it's a quick, easy job, and my guys are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. I don't want to lose my guys that are doing some of the renovation work either.
What key factors do you advise investors to consider when looking at properties? I mean, you have this overview blueprint, or they pretty much, a lot of them are hands off. They don't need specific direction.
They're hands off. I've taught them enough about investments. I have a different perspective when it comes to investments. Big problems don't scare me.
Yeah.
I like big problems because it scares most buyers, most investors that go to that weekend seminar that tells you, hey, buy my $1,500 class and I'll teach you how to make them flips and you can make 100,000 a year or whatever. And I'm not looking for the easy jobs. Everybody and their mother can go after those and are appealed to those. There's plenty of people that learn off of HDTV and decide, oh, I can put paint. My wife can pick the colors and we can have a flip quickly. And then it's 9 months later and they're still sitting on a property and they've overbuilt it and whatever. You know, I like big problems. If it's got foundation problems and needs a new roof, needs a new HVAC, it's going to have a more appealing price. Yes, we're going to have more money into it, but the rate of return is a lot bigger. So I've taught them to not be scared of that.
Yeah, it's going to create risk and reward, right? The higher the risk, higher the reward. In those scenarios, even on market value properties, we don't see as many of them as we used to, but market properties, I've probably bought, I don't know, 7, 8 houses off MLS, even though 90% of what I bought was not on MLS, but you could see it. And I knew that if the home needed probably somewhere around more than $30,000 to $40,000, it would scare off 99% of the buyers because they can't they can't visualize what the house should be or what it could become, even at 50, 60,000, right? And you see it and you're like, well, it's going to be the same amount of money. I still have to do paint and floors. That doesn't change. All I'm adding is some structure and maybe a roof, or maybe we're going to take some walls out and make it a lot better floor plan, right? But you can see it and they can't see it, because you've done enough of them. It's like, I'll bet you could walk a house and know instantly if you're putting in piers or not.
Yeah.
I mean, you do enough of them. And honestly, if you do that many flips, you probably, more than half of them are probably doing foundation. That'd be fair?
Absolutely. Yeah. The good flips, unfortunately, end up needing foundation repair. And it doesn't scare me. I mean,
I like the psychology. I really like the psychology of that. You know why that is? And this is what I've kind of thought about. The reason why I had so many foundation jobs is because when people live in a home for a long period of time and it starts cracking, they know they have to deal with the foundation. And if they're not going to deal with the foundation, they're not going to deal with the flooring. They're not going to deal with the walls. They're not going to deal with the kitchen. Yep. Why would I spend money on everything else? Because everything has to wait on foundation, and they won't fix the foundation because they think it costs $15,000, $20,000. So they don't address the foundation, which means they don't address anything else. I can't tell how many times that story has been repeated. So it's one of those foundations, one of those huge hurdles in our space, in our area, Dallas-Fort Worth, that people just can't seem to get past. So it's a great opportunity. Absolutely. It's a great opportunity for you and I, for sure. I love it.
Yeah.
You mentioned something, as far as where we're going over the next 5-10 years, where do you think the growth is going to be really happening in Dallas-Fort Worth? What do you foresee?
As in
just population growth? Where's the market going? I mean, where are we headed to?
I think population growth, we're going to continue heading to the northern suburbs of, Dallas, Collin County, Denton County, especially there's a lot of open land up 75 and into Anna and Melissa and Van Alstyne. I mean, those are going to become larger and more major cities. The toll roads planning to go further north. And if not, you look at things like Jerry Jones buying half the land out north. That gives you a pretty good perspective that something's going to happen that direction. And it always has. I remember moving to Frisco 30 plus years ago, and it was no traffic lights, a 4-way stop, and at 121 and Preston Road, and you could just see cattle forever. So, things are going to continue growing, I think, continue growing north. I don't think the prices are going to drop much. North Texas, I always tell everybody, my buyers, my sellers, my investors, North Texas is, and I always relate it to if they have children. If you have children, the book that you read to your kids, The Little Engine That Could, talks about the old trains and the new trains, and the old train just kind of keeps on chugging along and all these new trains are blowing past them. North Texas is that book, that story. It never is violent and never climbs 30%, 200% and drops the same thing. Even in 2008, we had 5-6% drop maybe in the market, and it took about a year and a half, almost 2 years, for it to come back to where it was before, where Other parts of the country, they're still recovering, you know. So we're just kind of slow and boring. It just keeps on chugging along and growing in that aspect. I think on the realtor side, the market's going to change. I think there's going to be definitely a learning curve on this. There's a lot of people that are taking advantage of this new change in good ways and also in bad ways, in my opinion. I don't think it benefited the general public in least bit, especially for us. You know, in Texas, we've had the buyer's rep agreement for, 20 plus years. Speaking to, I mean, I've got a partnership in Oklahoma and they had a buyer's rep agreement for a number of years. But out of 16 agents in Oklahoma, only one agent would do a buyer's rep or buyer's representation agreement one a year, maybe. All the other ones never used it. And they looked at it because they all were taught that way or had that concept of, hey, it's only to protect your commission, as opposed to, no, this is who you represent. So I see why and where some of these NAR lawsuits came about because, and I've spoken to some, I was surprised. I've spoken to some brokerages and brokers in up north that they didn't have buyer representation until all this at all. They were still sub agents. They were still 20 years ago where we were. So I was shocked at that was, we live in a bubble in Texas that we just assume that everybody's doing real estate the way we do. But then you hear some of these conversations or even see a contract and it's like, your full contract is 4 pages long. You got to be kidding me. Ours is twice as long without even adding amendments to it. So I think we're way ahead of the game. I think there's providing people are okay with that mindset and understanding what the buyer representation is like. I think we'll be okay. I think there's a lot of companies, online virtual companies that are trying to make buyer brokerages obsolete. The buyers today are a lot more educated or feel like they're a whole lot more educated. Yeah. I see that with my kids. They watched it on YouTube, so they think they know everything they need to know. I can learn how to do a root canal on YouTube. Am I about to do that myself? Heck no. I'm going to go pay a professional to do that. But I probably could. I'm sure there's people on YouTube that have done it themselves. And I think that's where we have the disconnect with our real estate industry, where people are watching YouTube videos and then you can tell based on the questions and some of the things that come out and even some of the misconceptions that we're having right now with the whole NAR thing. It's a little shocking at times.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of truth to that for sure. Gabriel, how do we find and contact you? What's a good place for us to be able to find information about your service?
So you can go to my name as a website, which is Gabriel Corra, or my brokerage, which is exlencerealty.com. Exlence is spelled phonetically. It's EXLENCEREALTY.com. And you can reach out to me from my website. Our office number is 972-588-8788. A lot of eights. But you can get a hold of myself or any one of my agents at that number as well. And we'll be more than glad to assist in any way we can.
Man, I love it. I appreciate your time, Gabriel. I'm sure we'll probably do it again sometime. Any last things that you want to share?
No, I think we've been pretty thorough, and it's hard to compartmentalize everything into a 30, 45-minute session. It's way too many years of doing this, and things have changed, and how we keep on evolving. You've got to keep on evolving in this business and be okay with making the mistakes. I tell my agents all the time, Edison did not invent the light bulb. He failed 1,000 times at doing it. So it's okay. Take advantage and worship your failures and learn from them.
All right. Awesome. Thanks again, Gabriel. Appreciate you joining us on this episode. Anyone has any more information, I'm happy to share with you and connect you with Gabriel. Has been inspiration. He's got a lot of really good advice, especially for new buyers and for people that are in the investment space. A lot of good expert advice there. So until next time, everyone have a high performance day. Thank you. That wraps up another episode of Real Estate Success DFW. I hope you're leaving with new insights that push your real estate career forward. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with fellow agents who's ready to succeed. And if you're interested in working together or have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me directly. My personal phone is 214-228-0383. Let's connect and make real estate success happen together. Until next time, keep pushing forward. I'm Shaune Corbett, and this is the Real Estate Success DFW. Have a high performance week.